So I was walking around checking out the things at the auction, and in the distance I spotted what looked like a Humvee, and I was like, oh, cool, let me check that out. But as I got closer, something just didn't look right with it. It seemed like it was a lot narrower, and every dimension was a lot smaller than what it would normally look like. So I decided to start investigating. Now, right off the bat, I noticed the sealed beam headlights. Those look like military M series headlights. But it is kind of hard to tell because civilian headlights up until the 1960s, the most common form was this large sealed beam headlight. So it could be a civilian one, it could be an M series one, it's hard to tell. But those turn signals are unmistakably M series front blackout marker and marker lights. So those are definitely M series, but when I was looking at the lift or the tie down rings, those don't quite look like the M series tie down rings. So based on the outside appearance, it looked like there was some military stuff, but it also just didn't look quite right. Something was weird with it. Besides the fact that it was painted orange, but that didn't really matter much because, old military trucks can be repainted any color once they hit the civilian market. So the first thing I did was walk around the outside and look for any signs of the old paint, but I had no luck. So then I started looking at the interior. And first of all, these seats definitely not military, at least the seat covers. It's possible that they took the seats and had them reskinned. Looking at the wiring, it looks like the wiring is completely custom. The wiper motor, that does look like a military wiper motor to me. With the little switch on there so that you can manually operate the wipers. Most of these were air-powered, but I think in some of the smaller vehicles, and maybe nowadays, they go with electric wipers, but I'm not 100% sure. Of course, the GMC steering wheel, that's not military. The gas and brake pedals, they don't look like the gas or brake pedals from any military vehicle I've ever seen. And, of course, the front passenger and driver seats are way too close together. A lot of people think that Humvees are like small Jeeps, but they're not. They're huge. I forget how much ground clearance they have, but they have like 3 feet of ground clearance from the ground to the body. They are also very long and very wide. They are like 10 feet wide, 8 feet wide, something like that. And the driver and the passenger, they sit like 3 feet apart because it has a massive tunnel that runs the length of the vehicle to be able to tuck all of the components out of the way and keep everything above the body line. Also, the snorkel intake that goes just above the cab, that goes up 6 feet. So the top of the cab is close to 6 feet off the ground. This just isn't quite the same dimensions. You can especially see it on the inside. Instead of having just this square box tunnel that runs the entire length of the vehicle, it's got a traditional bell housing here, and just the seats are way too close together. This shift lever looks like an M series shift lever and knob. The knob is especially what gives it away. It's big, but it's also flat. It's like someone took a big circular shift knob and then just squished it. And I've only really seen that on M series military vehicles. The other thing that kind of gives it away is this parking brake lever right here. This parking brake lever looks like the parking brake lever in a Humvee. Also, these gauges and this whole gauge panel right here, that is very much M series. This looks like it was out of a Jeep or possibly a Mutt, an M151. And then for the shifter, of course, it's a manual transmission. All of the Humvees are automatic. And that 4 on the floor shift pattern, I believe that's the shift pattern from the M151. So I was very curious at this point. Was this some sort of weird prototype that came before the Humvee? I know that the government did make a few prototype vehicles before the Humvee, so this might be something very special. But of course the dashboard did not have any data plates like you would normally see in an M-Series vehicle, and looking around I just was not seeing any data plates at all. I looked at the auction listing and it didn't have any information, it just said utility vehicle and that's it. So at this point I was curious enough to open the hood. Once I finally got the hood open, which was a bit of a struggle because the fiberglass was really flimsy, so trying to open it alone was a little difficult. The hood just kept wanting to bend and possibly crack. So I opened the hood and all was revealed. This, if you couldn't already tell, is not a V8 Detroit diesel engine from a Humvee. It is a gasoline engine, carbureted, inline 4-cylinder. Now, these spark plugs, that distributor, that is definitely M-Series. The distributor, the spark plug wires, they are the waterproof spark plugs and spark wires, so that is definitely M-Series right there. Another thing that gives this engine away as an old military engine is the oil filter. Now, the oil filter is not a military-style oil filter. Military-style oil filters, especially back in the day when they used carbureted gasoline engines, were all canister filters. This is a regular spin-on filter. But it's upside down, which normally these spin-on filters are either facing down, so you go in from the bottom and you spin it on, or in some applications they're kind of sideways, but they're never up top like this, unless you put an adapter kit on your engine to be able to use spin-on oil filters. So that's another clue that this was a military vehicle. Also, I recognize that fuel pump as a type of military fuel pump. And then, of course, the big oil bath air filter, definitely M-Series. I was also able to get a look at the generator, and the fact that it was a generator and not an alternator, again, speaks to the fact that it is an M-Series military vehicle. So, I start looking on the engine trying to find a serial number, and I finally find one. And it turns out this engine is from an M151. Another dead giveaway is the windshield. When I first opened the hood, I didn't actually realize it until now, but that is an M151 windshield, and that windshield is like set within this weird frame, but it's an M151 windshield for sure. Okay, so we figured out what this thing is. It was made out of the guts of an M151. So it's got the M151 engine, it's got the M151 transmission, parking brake. Because the M151 was considered to be too dangerous for the public, a lot of the M151s were cut in half before they were auctioned off. So you got a lot of the engines and transmissions, but the unibody was cut in half. So people would take these engines and transmissions and put them into other things, or they would build their own things with them. Now, it was the end of a long day. I had been walking around a lot. I had been looking at a lot of different vehicles, and I was already ready to go home, so I didn't want to spend a bunch of time crawling underneath the truck. So I went to the rear axle and looked underneath, and I saw a solid rear axle. So looking at these pictures some more, and especially after looking at the body lines, I think I understand what happened. You see that slope on the M151 right where the windshield meets the cab? and then it goes forward and then slopes down to the fenders. Looking at the engine shot from this, you see a similar slope start to form. So I think what happened was someone took the front end of an M151 plus the entire driveline from that M151. And presumably this was an M151 that was cut in half before it was sold so that it couldn't be welded back together and, just used on its own. And they added metal onto the front end to make it a little bit wider and make it resemble a Humvee. So the parts on the sides just made the whole thing a little wider, made it fit onto a longer frame. And then they kept the same driveline, same engine, same transmission, same shift knob, parking brake, same front end components. And then for the rear end, it looks like what they did is take the rear end from that M151, which is normally an independent suspension system, although that independent rear suspension has some issues. I forget what the geometry of it is, and maybe I am planning on doing a video at some point on different suspension systems and how they work. But to simplify things, they wanted to make it a solid rear axle. So they took that pumpkin from the independent rear suspension and mounted it to a steel bar. And that steel bar is welded to the hubs. So now you've taken an independent system where you have the pumpkin and you have two axle shafts that go down and can move around, and you've mounted everything to one single steel bar that, of course, can't move, creating a solid axle out of an independent axle. And then they just added some shocks and hung it on some leaf springs. And honestly, for the simplicity, it'll probably do its job pretty effectively. Yes, independent rear suspension can give you more wheel travel, but I mean, with how little travel there is on those shocks and those springs, this isn't going to be a major, off-road rock crawling machine. Now, I can't completely dismiss that this could be some sort of unicorn prototype, one of one, or one of very few little buggy vehicles that the Army was experimenting with when they were thinking about moving away from the M151, and eventually they adopted the Humvee. I know for a fact that there's at least 3 different kind of in-between prototype mini Humvee type things that were used by the military, and there definitely could be more, and this could be one of them. But I highly, highly doubt that. What I think happened here is somebody took an M151, maybe a few M151s, because these seats, they do kind of remind me of the seats in an M151. Just a little bit. They definitely are the same seats. They've just been reskinned. So took seats from an M151 and then took the front end of an M151 and modified it to make it look like a Humvee. Made this really nice hood out of fiberglass, and it's a little weak. It definitely could use some reinforcement, but it passes the 10-foot test. It looks good from 10 feet away. And then created this whole custom, it's got a steel ladder frame I saw underneath it, and the outside is all steel, and created this nice little mini Humvee that runs and drives, and maybe it might be a little underpowered, especially compared to today's standards and the side-by-sides that you can get. But I imagine that somebody would have done this in the 90s, when the Humvee was first adopted and, really came into the public eye. And when you look at the other side-by-side type things that were available in the 90s, this is probably right up there with the rest of them. So, yeah, probably not some super fabulous government prototype. I think this thing ended up selling for $4,000. And if I had had the money, it would have been pretty fun just to look at and dive into, and also just to run around in. But it didn't come with a title, which would make registering it a nightmare, and I don't need an off-road only vehicle right now. I needed a vehicle that I could drive on the road. So this was a nice short little video. I'm working on some really big videos right now. Hopefully they'll be coming out soon. But if you really like auction finds, and you really like old military vehicles, you should subscribe. So if you're not quite ready to decide whether to subscribe or not, that's okay. You can watch one of these videos here. One of these is about old military vehicles, and one of them is about a vehicle that I picked up at an auction recently. You can watch one of these videos right here, and then you can decide.